Welcome to the October webinar. My name is Sarah Snable. While some of you are logging in, I'll kind of just do a little bit of an intro on this month's webinar, as well as kind of talk a little bit about PROergonomics in case any of you are new to joining us in our monthly webinars. So my name is Sarah Snable, and I'm one of the co-founders of PROergonomics. I'm a registered kinesiologist, a certified professional ergonomist, and our team, we conduct webinars every month. So usually on a different topic. Sometimes we kind of have like a series where we might do one or two webinars in a row that are sort of synced in topic. And so we are kind of switching gears this month and talking about a good old classic is office ergonomics. And our spin that we're going to put on it this month is really talking about frequently asked questions. So kind of thinking about questions that we often get asked, questions that we find ourselves answering over and over again, sort of with different spins on them. But what I thought I would do is kind of put that into a slideshow format and address them. So that kind of, as opposed to just telling you how to set up your computer workstation, it's again putting on a bit of a different spin on it. So in terms of who we are, PROergonomics, we are a consulting company and we do a lot of consulting and training, and it can be on office ergonomics. We work with a lot of municipalities, some colleges, industrial or manufacturing environments, and kind of the nature of the work that we do there is somewhat catered to the environments as well. It could be documenting physical demands and cognitive demands of a job, setting up computer workstations, helping with design reviews, or evaluating the risk, an ergonomic risk assessment for a job, and coming up with some justification on some recommendations on how you might change it, always with the goal, and no matter the job and no matter the type of work we're doing, we're trying to minimize those musculoskeletal disorders, the strains and sprains that are a huge factor in the workplace, right? It's more than 40% of injuries. So our team, we're all registered kinesiologists and working towards, if not already, our certified ergonomist designation. And so with our combined years of experience and all of our different areas of industries, we kind of cover off quite a good range, and do cover most of Ontario. So we cover quite a large range, maybe not necessarily all of Ontario, but definitely within, the GTA, and then probably a 2 to 3 hour radius at least from that. And so really we really strive to be experts and to deliver a customized product through our team approach. So you always work with one or two consultants, and behind the scenes we really try to work and support each other so that you really are getting the best bang for your buck in terms of expertise and, again, that customized approach. So I know many of you on the webinars are people that we have worked with in the past, and some of you may be new. So I always like to kind of touch a little bit on what we do, just so that you kind of know where we're coming from and kind of what our qualifications and accreditations are in terms of being able to deliver this content. Definitely we're reputable. So any questions or anything throughout this webinar, you can use the chat bar on the right side of your screen, or ask a question. And then what it does is it flags to me that there's a question, and I can pause to answer it. So I'm going to, because I am answering questions today kind of based on certain topics, as you have a question, I will save those for the end. So as you think of them, feel free to put them all in here, and then I will save like a question period at the end. So the last 10 minutes of the webinar, we can go through whatever questions you guys post throughout the webinar. And again, you can also use that chat bar to let me know if my sound cuts out or whatever. I am using a new headset today, so I think we should be good, but that is kind of the way to communicate with me as the presenter. Any questions that you think of after the fact, you can always email us, info@proergonomics.ca, or visit our website for more information. So that's kind of the housekeeping out of the way. So today's agenda really is answering your questions, and answering general questions, right, that we get from our clients, from, just our friends and family sometimes, who kind of think that we, who may not fully understand everything that we do, and they're curious on how they should be setting up their computer workstation. So we've kind of pooled this within our team, kind of come up with these list of questions that are big hitters for us. So types of things that we're going to talk about today are sit-stand stations, so how to address them, how to set up multiple monitors, what are our thoughts on wrist rests, what about monitors when people have bifocals or progressive lenses, What's your favorite chair? As an ergonomist, we often get the questions, well, what chair would you recommend? And we know there's so many options out there. So going to help to kind of give you some pointers today. And then, what are some options to do if somebody is expressing pain or discomfort in their shoulder and we think it's related to mousing? So that's kind of my general focus for today in terms of questions that I'm going to answer. And then as you guys have questions, of course, as you're listening in, feel free to post them and I will try to address those at the end. So questions that we often get, I mean, this is a big one right now, is SitStand desks or SitStand workstations or add-on units, that can raise your keyboard and monitor up higher. Is should we be providing them? And I had a bunch of different questions come in about this, so I've listed them here and I've reworded them slightly just to save on space, really, on writing. So here's one example where you might be able to relate to this. So an employee moves to a new department. They had a sit-stand station at their last department, but not in the new department. It's not standard there. So what do you do? Or how about an employee brings in a doctor's note saying that they need a standing workstation? What do you do? Or sometimes you might ask, well, what are other companies doing to address the sit-stand request, right? Or maybe this even helps you to answer your what do you do with those other two scenarios. So in the first case, if an employee is moving to a new department or they're moving, even if they were moving to I guess if they're moving to a new department, the big thing here is should they get a sit-stand station just because they had one at their last place? And ultimately, I think the answer comes down to the reasons why they had one at their previous station, right? So if somebody had one and it was because the whole department was outfitted with one and it wasn't any kind of a unique accommodation or a medical reason, then I'm not sure that you really need to do anything, although it may warrant an evaluation of kind of how somebody might request a sit-stand station. And that kind of leads into, what if somebody does bring in a doctor's note, for example, saying that they need a standing workstation? Should we just give them one because their doctor is saying that they do? And so I'll tell you, kind of in our experience, is that we've come in to do assessments and the employee has had a doctor's note, and at the end of the day, we haven't always recommended that a standing workstation is the appropriate solution. In some cases, yes, but not in every case is what I'm saying. So we know that sometimes doctor's notes can be pretty generic, or they could be just kind of, a verbatim of what the employee has asked them to write, and they kind of pay their $25 for the note and, they're out the door. But in some cases, it may not be the right fit, or it could be that there's some other adjustments that need to be made to their workstation before, we explore that standing workstation. And so in terms of, that kind of leads us into the next question, what are other companies doing? Well, it is a little bit of a mixed bag out there, but I think what's important is to have some kind of a process, right? So, if somebody is going to request an ergonomic assessment for any reason, whether it be specifically for a standing workstation or even because, they want a new chair, then having some kind of a standardized request process, I think, is really helpful, so that you are kind of doing the same process for everybody who's asking, so there's not discrimination because, well, Janet asks all the time, and so I'm going to say no because she's bugging me, right? You don't get, you help to kind of weed any of that out. So having some kind of a process. There are definitely some companies that say you have to have a medical note before you can get one. I don't necessarily agree that has to be the case because, again, it's not always that it's warranted. There could be other solutions that we could look at first or instead. And then if you are going to look at any kind of a standardizing, you are going to go ahead with purchasing sit-stand stations, whether it be on that, as requested basis, or if you're going to do some kind of a blanket purchase, just consider the different models that are out there, because I don't know that everybody really understands all of the differences. This is one of those, well, I probably first called it a bit of a fad, when we ask about, well, should I sit with an exercise ball instead of a chair? And that was definitely a bit of a fad request. And standing workstations, although it kind of came fast and furious as if it was maybe a fad, it is sticking for a little bit longer, and there is definitely some valid reasons why. But what it does mean is that some of the prices are changing. So it used to be very, very expensive, or significantly more expensive, to get a height adjustable desk, an electric one where the whole desk went up and down, versus getting one of those add-on units. one of these two here that I have pictured shown here, where it kind of is just a unit that mounts on there, and the price in many cases is that gap is lessening. Is that the right word? Yeah, it's getting smaller, right? The price difference isn't as big. You can very well get a decent priced, fully adjustable desk. And in some cases, even just get the electric legs, right, that go up and down, and you can use your existing tabletop. And in that case, it could, depending on the size that you need, but you could get them for under $1,000, I think, with some companies. So it's just important to think about that, if you've now said, yes, we're going to look at some sit-stand workstations, and what types should we be providing, is just to consider how it's going to fit into your workspace. The nice thing about a desk is that everything goes up and down. So if you have staff who are doing a lot of paperwork or referencing binders, those kinds of things that are on the phone a whole lot, then everything goes up and down. Potentially some challenges if they're in a cubicle environment and it's modular furniture, or potentially some issues too if it's a really large desk, right? The cost starts going up if we talk about raising up a whole L-shaped desk. So definitely some pros and cons. You can look at other add-on units where, they just sit, it's like a big unit that just sits on top of the desk, so it's weighted, and then your monitor and keyboard sit on top of that and they go up and down. Those are usually the better price point, so potentially under $500. I think I've seen some models as low as $300. You just got to be careful because sometimes they're not always you kind of pay for what you get. In some cases you might get a cheaper unit or a more flimsy unit. The definite downside of these is that if you are somebody who is a little bit shorter or smaller and you need your keyboard to be a little bit lower than your desk height, this type of a unit isn't going to solve that problem. Sure, it's going to get you to the right height when you're standing, but the keyboard does not adjust below the desk. And that's when you might want to consider a different style of unit as well. So again, the whole thing sits on top of the desk and it's weighted so that it doesn't tip over, but it does have a keyboard tray, sort of an option that goes up and down with the monitor. And that way then the keyboard actually can drop below the desk surface. So that's a total positive. And so, you're kind of seeing the different price points. Like if it's just the unit that sits on top of the desk, that's the cheaper. This is probably middle of the road. And then the full desk that goes up and down is definitely going to be at your higher price point. In terms of, kind of going along with this, in terms of brands or models that we frequently recommend, and I should probably state this now kind of before we talk about any other adjustments throughout this webinar as well, is that we are not brand specific. We try to be very brand neutral, and we work with the vendors that our clients are working with. So if you buy all of your products from eWay or you buy all your products from Grand and Toy, we will try to pick something within that. And so in some cases, an Ergotron unit, like the one that's pictured here, is one that is relatively accessible, but that doesn't say that that's always what I recommend. I do think that there are other models that are equivalent or that have other features. So if I go back to this kind of a style, I think this is a Varidesk model, and I have not recommended this particular unit very often, if at all, but there is another model. Fellows makes one that's actually pretty interesting, the Fellows Lotus, I think it's called, and it's this style of unit, right, where it sits on the desk. It doesn't go below the desk surface. But what it does have that's kind of a nicer feature to this is it has a larger work surface, so you're able to bring some of your paperwork or your phone or whatever up and down with you. So there's a couple of different models that we like, but again, we try to keep ourselves relatively neutral. We don't get any kind of kickback for recommending any certain brands or models. So I don't necessarily have a favorite model, but I do have, or a favorite product or brand, but one of my favorite models in terms of a good price point is this kind of a style, similar to an Ergotron, where the keyboard drops below the desk surface. I think it fits a larger number of people. So moving along, here's another kind of question, is how do we position multiple monitors? And this question has varied a little bit. So sometimes it's, I work with 2 screens, what's the best setup? Or I work with 3 screens, or I'm thinking of adding a 3rd screen, where should I put it? And I mean, the short answer really is, if you can work with 1 screen, try to just stick with 1 screen. Really, screens are getting wider, screens are getting bigger, and a lot of people are thinking they need to have 2 screens to increase their efficiency or productivity because they can have 1 screen as a reference. But it does create some postural challenges when you start getting multiple screens, because now your neck and even kind of through your upper back, it ends up twisting to look at the screens. So, my first kind of word of caution or whichever to think about is just really evaluate whether or not you do need two screens. And if you are only at one screen right now, try to stick with that before you start increasing the number of screens. If you are currently working with two screens and you really like that's it, you want to stick with that, then your best bet really is to pick one as your primary screen. Very few people actually use both screens equally, as much as that might be your first response to tell me is that you use them both equally. It is rare. It is likely that you are going to use one more often and then one as kind of a secondary or a reference screen, and that really would be the ideal. So in an ideal world, you should be centered with that primary screen. So first off, pick a primary monitor, and then you're going to center yourself with that one. So that way then, most of the time, so let's say it's 80% of the time you're looking at that screen or 60% of the time you're looking at that screen, that means that for 60 to 80% of your day, you are looking straight on at that screen and there's no twisting happening. So that's the neutral posture, that's the straight neck postures that we're looking for as ergonomists to try to minimize your injury risk. Where does that second screen go? Well, it should be adjacent, so beside your primary screen, and ideally on a bit of an angle. So there's a couple of, different ways that you could ways that you could position it, in the sense that you could put it on your right side or your left side, and that might be because of the space that you have at your desk. But if you have the ability to put it on either side, there might be one side that's a little bit more advantageous to you, and that kind of goes with your eye dominance. So what I'll get you to do, I can't really see what you're all doing, but I'm going to instruct you, and hopefully you can kind of play along with this activity. So your eye dominance doesn't always match up with your hand dominance. So what I want you to do is make a frame like this with your hands, and you're probably going to need to push yourselves a bit back from your computer. So hopefully you've got a little bit of space. You want to be about 10 feet away. Let's kind of give it that. And you're going to make your frame around this picture of an eyeball. So you're going to frame it, and I want you to make sure your arms are outstretched right in front of you. So you're making your frame with your arms outstretched in front of you, and you have it centered on this image, this eye image on your screen. And what I want you to do is close your right eye. So did that object stay centered? Okay, that's a question for you. So now open both eyes. Now close your left eye. Did it stay centered? Okay, so if you have whatever eye you were looking at, so if you closed your left eye, that means you were viewing it with you're viewing the image with your right eye, and it stayed more centered, then what that means is that your right eye is your more dominant eye, and your second screen is better suited to be on your right side. It means that your eyes will do a little bit more of the work, your neck will do a little bit more twisting. So again, if you want to repeat that activity, it means you don't have to use the image on the screen. You can use really anything that is roughly about 10 feet away from you. Make sure your arms are outstretched in front of you and make a frame around it. And practice closing one eye at a time, and see which eye keeps your image or your focal point more centered. That's your dominant eye, and that's an activity or a little exercise that you can do if you're the one that's conducting assessments as well. So maybe some of you are tuning in to kind of get some tips for yourself. Maybe you're tuning in because you're the one that's doing the assessments, but that's a nice little activity that kind of helps to give some weighting as to, what side you might put your secondary screen on. And it's kind of a little fun one to do. You could incorporate it in any kind of training you're doing too. So sorry, I just have that. So that's for multiple monitors. I guess I should probably comment on if you have more than two monitors, it gets a little tricky really in terms of what is the best spot. And so I still would encourage you to pick a primary monitor, and then maybe you talk about positioning your secondary screens, kind of if you can rank them in an order. First primary screen, secondary screen, tertiary or third most used screen, and kind of put your secondary screen on your dominant eye and the third one on the other eye, and then kind of go from there. But I don't think there's any really set guidelines on how you set up all those screens. The goal always is to try to create as neutral a posture as possible. Okay, so this next question is something that, our team often discusses a lot too, is do you recommend wrist rests? Should we be recommending wrist rests? And by a wrist rest, I mean like a palm cushion, sort of in the picture here. So one could be a cushion, like one of those gel pads or a foam pad that you buy and position right in front of your keyboard, or those thinner palm pads that kind of automatically come when you buy a keyboard tray. So do you recommend them is an often a question that I get, and my immediate answer is usually no. So it's almost always no, and it's not that I'm anti wrist rest. I mean, I'm a little bit anti wrist rest, but it's because I want to really look at the root cause. So I don't know that a wrist rest really solves the problem. So I don't think that everybody kind of needs that as like a blanket solution. But if you feel that you need a wrist rest because your wrists are hurting, then I definitely want to dig a little bit deeper to figure out why your wrists are hurting. And often it comes down to the height. So if you don't have your keyboard at the right height, which would be in line with your seated elbow height, so with your arms hanging nice and close to your sides, your shoulders are relaxed, and your forearms are parallel to the ground, so your elbows will be bent to about 90 degrees, your keyboard should fit right underneath of that. And if you're a little bit too high or a little bit too low, then what can happen is your wrists start to bend. Especially if it's too high, in particular, you get some contact stress, or your wrists start rubbing on the edge of your desk surface. And so it's possible that by fixing the height, you can improve wrist postures, you can eliminate that contact stress, and you're not even going to need to worry about a cushion pad. Some of my other kind of reasons why I don't always recommend them also is because I'm not in love with how high some of them are, especially with newer keyboards. What I'm finding is they're becoming more of a slim profile, like a lower height. And so some of those gel keyboard wrist rests can be quite high. They can be an inch and a half high. And although it is softer, obviously, than resting your wrists on the desk, it's still a little bit high, and I'm not sure that it's really solving the problem of improving wrist postures. I think it potentially in some cases is creating more awkward wrist postures. So the big thing really is about avoid anchoring them. When I do recommend a wrist rest, that's a tongue twister, it's most often when it's on a keyboard tray. And the reason why I'm less likely to say remove the wrist rest on a keyboard tray is because the ones that come installed on a keyboard tray are often a very slim profile. So you can even see in these pictures, I know they're kind of small, but the keyboard tray, it's usually only about a half an inch height. It's usually very small. And whereas like the extra add-on units that you're buying are closer to an inch and a half. And sometimes that can make a big difference in terms of postures. Regardless, I don't always say to take them away, and I do think that it can be a nice solution. It could even be a temporary solution that you put in to kind of help while your wrists are recovering, if that's the nature of your injury. But the big thing really is to avoid anchoring your wrists. So the wrist rest is meant exactly that. It's meant to be a rest. So in between typing, while you're thinking, on those thoughts, then your wrist can rest on the wrist rest. But really, you shouldn't have your wrists anchored while you're typing, right? We want to make sure that we're having movement that's free-flowing, that we're recruiting larger muscles. And as soon as we anchor our wrists, we're creating pressure points and, again, just kind of restricting some of the movement and blood flow. So in general, I don't recommend wrist rest very often. And the reason is that I'm trying to address the root cause. So moving along, next question is, how do you adjust monitors for different lenses? And so I kind of generalized this question because I had a couple of questions like, when somebody wears bifocals, where should I be positioning the monitor? Or what about progressive lenses or progressive lenses? That's the new one, right? Fewer and fewer people are wearing bifocals, and we're seeing more progressive lenses. So how do you position the monitor for people who wear glasses as compared to the general guideline? So CSA standard says that when you are sitting in your chair looking straight ahead at your monitor, your eyes should be in line with the top of your screen, right? The top like 1 to 2 inches, so that your neck is never tipping up like this individual in my picture, right? And so that's what the CSA guidelines are stating. Now, when you wear bifocals, what happens is you are looking at your close-up distances through the bottom portion of your lens, and that would include your monitor. That's probably what's going to fit into that close range viewing distance. And then what often ends up happening is this posture again here that you're seeing in this picture is that people will tip their head back or kind of jut their chin out because they're trying to adjust their head so they can view out the bottom portion of their lenses at the monitor. this is a very fatiguing position for your neck and your shoulders, like kind of your upper back. It's just creating a lot of a lot of bad postures through the spine, a lot of fatigue, a lot of tension. And a lot of people don't even really notice that they're doing it, but it's kind of one of those things as an observer. If you're going out and doing the assessment, if this is a posture that you're seeing, you know for sure that you want to lower the monitor. So for bifocal wearers, you're going to want to try to lower it a bit lower, and the general guideline is at least 2 inches below their eye height. So instead of having the top of the screen in line with their eye height, it's going to be about 2 inches below, maybe even 2 to 3 inches. The exact measurement is going to vary, obviously, with the size of their monitor. But what I'm always trying to find anytime I make adjustments to the monitor, it's not always about, measuring exact height or measuring exact distance and trying to compare it to a number. I'm always trying to look for straight neck postures or neutral neck postures. I don't want to see this tipping up. I don't want to see leaning forward to see the screen. And so in some cases that may mean deviating a little bit from the CSA guidelines to try to get that sweet spot. So the phrase sweet spot is often what I use when I talk about monitor adjustments. Progressive lenses, they can be a little trickier. They are probably actually a bit more similar to non-glasses wearers. So the top of the screen at eye height. And again, this is all about the sweet spot. So it kind of depends on the person, right? So kind of where is it that they are looking through their lenses at the screen. And this is where some observing from this profile angle is going to be key, right? Because if you can look at that and kind of see if they're looking at it straight on or if you're seeing any tipping of their head up or down, then you'll know that you need to make an adjustment. But for progressive lenses, I usually start with the general guidelines. I don't really change things. But ultimately, I'm trying to find that quote unquote sweet spot. Right? I want the most neutral, the most relaxed postures that I can possibly get, because most people are sitting at a computer for multiple hours. So you can imagine holding an awkward neck posture is going to be super fatiguing and straining on the muscles of the neck. What chairs do you recommend? This is a good one. So I kind of again blanketed this question because the question that I often get is, well, what chair should I buy? And what features should I get in a chair? And which chair is better? Should I get chair A or chair B? And maybe I'm comparing 2 different brands. Or maybe it's within the same brand and I'm comparing different models. What makes one chair better than the other? And everybody kind of wants to know, what our opinion is. And to be honest, there are so many chairs out there, and I'm sure that's why we get that question all the time, is because there are so many chairs to choose from. And it's not necessarily that you can I was going to say, it's not really that you can choose a bad chair, because that's not true. There are lots of chairs out there, and there's probably too many options, and definitely I wouldn't say that they're all created equal. And just because a chair is in an expensive price point or a higher price point, I wouldn't necessarily say that chair is better. Nor would I say that all chairs in the same price point are equivalent. So price point isn't always the best way to compare quality of a chair. I definitely have some of my favorite chairs, and favorite meaning that, maybe I recommend them more often than others. And sometimes it's because of, so again, remember I said that I often use preferred vendors. So, if you often order through POI Interiors, for example, or you order through eWay, and you're able to get Global chairs at a really great price, and that's kind of who you have your seating contract with. Well, Global makes a ton of different chairs, and I definitely have my preference, right, of the however many chairs that they have. There's really only about 2 to 3 chairs that I would recommend, and I try to stick within what you already have standardized. So if you have the Global Tritech chair, for example, as the one that is your standardized chair, then I'm going to try to recommend that one. And I'm usually pretty happy because I like the Tritech chair. So it is one that I would recommend. And the reason why I like it is because it has a lot of adjustability. Right? If I can pick any chair, if you have no seating contract and you're not really worried about budget, and you don't have to buy from anybody, if you're like really looking to get started, then Ergocentric is a chair that I often go to. Love that brand. All of their chairs have adjustability. Even their minimum chair, right, kind of their lowest price point, their entry-level chair, it is going to have all of the adjustability that you need to meet CSA guidelines and then some. So regardless of the brand or the model of chair that I'm looking at, I am looking for adjustability. So yes, I might be doing an assessment for one person and I want to get the chair to fit them, but often in the back of my mind with any assessment that I'm doing, it might be that I'm recommending a chair that will fit this person, but that could also fit the entire department or the entire office, right? And so if that's the case, you don't want to buy 30 different types of chairs. You kind of want to pick one chair and standardize it across the office. So the more adjustability you can get, the better, because it's going to fit your 5-foot tall person and your 6-foot tall person. It's going to fit your 100-pound person and your 250-pound person. It's going to fit a whole variety of different sizes if you buy a chair that has that adjustability built in. The nice thing is that chairs are coming with a lot more adjustability as kind of a standard. So it often can be less of, upgrade options that you're checking off and you're watching the dollar signs or the price keep going up. But really adjustability is key. And in particular, most chairs are going to come with seat height adjustability. They're going to come with armrest height adjustability. They are going to come with, most often they come with some backrest adjustability, whether it be the recline and or the height going up and down. But something that I really, really like in a chair is when it has lumbar support. So that curvature that kind of supports the S-curve in your spine. And that isn't always a default in a chair, but when a chair has it, especially if you're trying to pick one chair that's going to fit the widest variety of people, having like an air bladder, for example, in the lumbar support, in the lower back support, if you have an air bladder that can kind of pump up, and so that we would call that depth adjustable lumbar support, that is definitely an add-on feature that I strongly recommend. So definitely I'm looking for chairs that are like that, because when you buy let's say you buy chairs to outfit your whole office, and that's one of the features that are missing, it's often the reason why a few people, they might be all comfortable at first for the first couple of months, and then as they, get more adjusted to the chair, they realize that they're not really that comfortable. It was kind of the feeling of new maybe is what felt nice because it was better than their old chair. But often the reason why I would recommend a new chair is that it fits them in all other ways, but they don't have enough back support. So I like having chairs with a depth adjustable lumbar support. I also like the option for different size seat pans, or in some ways you can get, so if you look at these chairs in this picture here, they have that U-shaped bar under the front edge of the seat pan, and that'll slide the seat in and out or forward and back, just like your car seat. I like when that is an adjustment feature because that helps to accommodate different heights of people, right? The different leg lengths. And then in some cases, I do like when you can get kind of a petite, regular, large seat pan. So that is something that not all companies do. It is something that I like about the Ergocentric brand of chair, is that, all of their chairs will look the same. This picture that I'm showing here, for example, is an Air-centric chair. And the backrest is the same regardless of the size, but you can buy a petite and a regular and a large seat pan. You can buy some even additional customized options as well, like extra long or whatever for the people that are really tall. But the chair looks the same for your whole office, but you do have the option to kind of customize the size of the seat pan to fit, your really petite people and your really tall people. So, your people who are like 4'11" and 5 feet tall with short legs, they might need a bit of a smaller seat pan because the regular adjustments that are happening with that seat slider, that might not be enough for somebody who's really short, and similarly for somebody who's really tall. Again, another reason why I might recommend a chair is also because of the customer service. So this is definitely, as a consultant, again, I am not brand specific, but if I am going to introduce you to somebody, to a new vendor, to a chair that I recommend, I for sure want to recommend somebody that I think is going to give you good customer service, right? I don't want to recommend somebody and then you have a nightmare of a time ordering from them. That sucks. That sucks for everybody. And so that is another reason, obviously, why I like to recommend Ergocentric if you are looking for somebody brand new. Customer service is top notch. Not to say that other companies aren't, it's just in my experience, that is, if you're asking for my professional opinion, Sarah Snabel will say that she likes Ergocentric chairs the best, but it's not to say that I don't like other chairs, it's just that's kind of, if given the opportunity, that's where I'm going to go. Again, in some cases, an ergocentric chair may be a higher price point. Again, I will try to pick within your vendor. So if you order from eWay, it is likely that you're going to get global chairs for a great price. And by all means, a Tritech chair would be relatively similar to one of these chairs that I have pictured here in terms of adjustability. It has that depth adjustable lumbar support. It has the different size seat pans, the small, medium, or the small, standard, large. And then the difference really is that usually you're ordering from eWay, so you may or may not, depending on your account manager, just have different customer service experience. I will let you know, though, for anybody who is interested, just that Ergocentric, in case you weren't aware, has the seating contract with the Ontario government, which means they get really, really good pricing. And so for any of you who are public sector, where you're government funded, so if you get any kind of money from the Ontario government, so like municipality, hospital health cares, community health centers, all of those things, you have the ability to kind of jump on board with this contract. And so if that is something that you are interested in, if you have no idea about, just shoot me a message and I can put you in touch with somebody who can get you on board with that. It's not really the language that I speak. It's something like you have to sign the VOR, or the vendor of record, I think. So, but by all means, I can definitely put you in touch with somebody who can get that. And I get no kickback on recommending them. It's just a product that I like, and I think they get great customer service. And if you like good prices, then this is something to explore. So another question that I often get is, what do we do with the mouse? And so I get kind of a whole series of questions really related to this. And so how do I address pain with mousing? And maybe it's wrist pain, maybe it's shoulder pain, maybe it's neck pain, but it seems to be kind of on the right side, and I think it's related to the mouse. And so what do I do? And really it comes down to doing a full-on assessment. Often, that's always the case, is that it's not like I say, oh, you have shoulder pain and you think it's the mouse, well, then you should buy this mouse. That's never my answer. My answer is always, well, let's look at what's really going on here. And so my first thought is always to check the height. So similarly about, with that wrist rest, if you're getting wrist pain, wrist discomfort, if you're getting shoulder discomfort, and you think this is related to the mouse, let's make sure that your mouse is at the right height. So it should, again, be in line with your elbow height, so right beside your keyboard, with your shoulders relaxed, your elbows at 90 degrees and in close to your body. You should be able to use the mouse and kind of maintain that posture, right? It should be at the right height. If it's too low, you get a bent wrist posture. You can get contact stress, like your wrist rubbing on the desk with that bent wrist. And if it's too high, then your shoulder's for sure not relaxed, right? You're getting the shoulder flexion or the reaching posture. So first you want to make sure you're at the right height. And that could be, lowering the mouse onto a keyboard tray, or it could be raising the chair up to make sure that you're in line with your elbow height, having your elbow height align with the desk or the mouse, and then, putting a footrest in case you've created a foot dangling position. And really looking for contact stress. So again, I don't want, depending on the shape or the layout of the workstation, maybe you're in a bit of a curved workstation, maybe you're working in the corner of the desk, just make sure that the edge of the desk isn't rubbing anywhere along your forearm or on the wrist. All of those can contribute, so just because you're having shoulder pain, it doesn't mean that the problem really is coming from the shoulder. It could be, anywhere along the limb or even in the back. And similarly, just because you're having wrist pain, it doesn't have to mean that, we're honing in on the wrist and looking at that. We want to look at the big picture, right? It could be coming from somewhere else. So again, looking for contact stress and looking for ways to mitigate that. And it could be as simple as adjusting the height, and then that changes your wrist posture, and we've eliminated the contact stress. Maybe it means that you're not working in the corner of the workstation and we move you to the straight edge. So it really depends. Maybe it means that we are just shifting things around, right? You want to check for the layout. So you want to check to see, if I look at this picture on the bottom, for example, this person is reaching to the mouse and I'm not really sure the reason, right? So it could be, one, I think the height. I think if she went up a little bit higher in her chair, then that mouse is going to be more in line with her elbow height. But also her mouse seems to be pretty far away, right? Like you can see that her keyboard is right in front of that document holder. and our mouse seems to be far out. And I think this is just kind of a habit that a lot of people have, is their mouse gets a little bit of creep, right? It starts to creep away from them. So in that case, it's like a work method thing where you just make sure to keep your mouse in close to you. And if it's something, that you're really struggling with, then, maybe you do look at a different style of mouse for that. One that, you don't move around. You look for more of a trackball style mouse or a touchpad or something where the mouse doesn't physically move. You just kind of use your fingers to manipulate the cursor and the mouse itself stays stationary. But again, just kind of making sure that you do keep that mouse close to you. And reaching could also occur, like you could be at the right height. Maybe you don't have any contact stress. You're working on the straight edge of your desk, so you've got a good layout. It's not like your paperwork or whichever is pushing your mouse further away. And so that would be more like the picture on top here, where because I can't tell exactly that the height is perfect because we're looking from the top down, but I'll tell you, she is at a good height here. But what we're trying to capture here is that just the standard layout of the keyboard here, because she has a relatively petite frame, the position of the mouse on the right side, because she's got her number pad there, it's causing her to reach a little bit. It's causing her shoulder to be abducted or rotating outwards, right? So you can see that when she's typing, everything looks neutral, and then to use the mouse, her right arm actually rotates out a bit to the right to access her mouse. And that is no fault to how she's adjusted the height or the layout of the workstation. It is more so just that style of keyboard with her petite frame means that her mouse, can't really be positioned that much closer. And so this is something that I often suggest. So again, and it could be for petite people, and it could be for anybody who, I kind of see that they're reaching on the right side. If I notice they're reaching over the number pad, one of the first suggestions I might ask them to consider is to mouse with their left hand. So I kind of had this cheesy little diagram here, an old school diagram actually that I could find that has the good old tube monitor. But ignoring that, looking at the shoulder postures here. So if you use a standard keyboard, which is what probably most of you have, kind of looking down at your own keyboard right now, if you move your mouse to the left side, what you'll notice is that your shoulder will not have to reach as far away from your body to access it. That's because you'll be centered with your keys. Your number pad will be on your right side, and your mouse will be equal distance on the left side. So it immediately creates a better balance of tasks. Okay, and so you can see in diagram B, that's kind of the standard layout, is that, when you're centered with your keys, then you have to reach over your number pad to your mouse. And for some people, this can create a reaching posture, and it can cause some extra strain on the shoulder and potentially the wrist as well. So it's something that I often suggest for people to consider, because it's an immediate thing. It's an immediate change. You don't have to wait for a product to come in. You don't have to, order anything. It doesn't cost anything, other than it does cost, your time and patience and a little bit of a learning curve here to train yourself to mouse with the left hand. And so, I get it. This option isn't for everybody. But for sure, it's something that I recommend considering. And if that's not really going to fly, if it's something, I've tried that, it's really not going to work, or I have too many deadlines, I really can't see this working, then I might suggest a different style of keyboard. This would be a relatively common recommendation by one of us if we're seeing that kind of shoulder posture related to, reaching to the mouse. And it could be not only just these two, but these are two good examples really. This Evoluent compact keyboard is one where it has full-size keys. That's a full-size keyboard. It just doesn't have a number pad. And so what that means is that you could keep your mouse on your right side, but now you don't have to reach over your number pad. This brand, this company, Evoluent, they also make a keyboard where the number pad is attached on the left side. So, if you still need a number pad, then that could be an option as well. So your mouse stays closer to your body on your right side, and we just move your number pad to the left instead. Or you go for, you could buy an external number pad as well. This Microsoft keyboard has a separate number pad that comes with it, and then it has this bit of a sloped or a shaped keyboard. So this is one that I would only recommend really if I thought that somebody would benefit from that sloped or angled kind of that sculpted shape. And then if a straight keyboard is going to work most often, I'll go to one like an Evoluent or something similar, right, where there's no number pad or the number pad's on the left. key thing to keep in mind actually for any of you shopping for these types of keyboard is just make sure they have regular size keys or full size keys. You don't want to get any of those mini keyboards. They get a lot harder to type on. They create almost worse wrist postures because they're so small. So you want to make sure that it really is like a standard size of keyboard, and the difference is either the location of the mouse, the number pad, or whether it has one or not. You may also want to consider a different style of mouse. So for somebody who is having a lot of pain kind of in the shoulder, or even more so probably if they were having pain in the elbow or the forearm or wrist, I might consider something like this vertical mouse, where you're not changing for them to mouse on the left side, but you're slightly changing the posture of their arm when they're mousing on the right side. So you're putting it in more of this handshake position. And so that can help to relieve a lot of tension actually in the wrist and the forearm and into the elbow, which then can translate up to the shoulder. So this could be a good opportunity or a good option to explore if you're looking to help relieve some discomfort. And then the roller mouse is something that is just so different than a regular mouse. The whole mouse sits right in front of your keyboard. It does come at a relatively high price point, so it's not one that I recommend frequently, but when I do recommend it, I do find that it really does work. So for people who are having shoulder pain, this eliminates reaching because it sits right in front of you. You can use both hands relatively equally because it's centered in front of you. So, and then again, because it's so different than a traditional or standard mouse, you are actually able to use both hands a little bit more equally, just because you're not asking your left hand to do exactly the same thing that you were asking your right hand to do, right? Both hands are going to be learning this new modality equally. So I am not positive on the exact price point. I think it's more of like in the $400 range, whereas all of these other options would be somewhere around $100. So I usually try to avoid the roller mouse if I can, just mostly based on price point. But when it's needed, oh man, I do get really good reviews, that it really helped to solve some discomfort and relieve that pain. So I guess the short answer really is how to address pain with mousing. It's that you really want to try to look at the root cause. So, doing an assessment and trying to figure it out. The answer is not always, oh, give them this mouse, or, oh, make this adjustment. There is a little bit more digging that needs to happen. So I will take some time now to review some questions. So please feel free, fill out any questions you have in the chat bar. And while you're doing that, what I will tell you about is our offer for this month. And so, we really believe, like, as much as I'm kind of going through some questions, that are frequently asked, I know that many of you are doing assessments and maybe you're getting asked those same kind of questions over and over again, and how do we then pass all this information on to our staff or to others in our area who are maybe doing these assessments. And so, education is a big deal. And in some ways, office ergonomics can be done to death. It can be kind of boring. It could be, we all think that it's relatively easy, and, it's not necessarily rocket science, but it's one of those ways of, how do you really learn? And so, reading a little poster, reading an article that says, this is how you adjust it, that's one thing, but are you actually doing it? And so one of the methods that we use to target, larger groups of staff is hosting a training session or a workshop. So we go through the main principles in setting up their computer workstation. They learn how to make adjustments to their own workstation, and then they go back to their desks and they try to apply those principles. And then we, like the ergonomist, would come around and meet with all those attendees, usually in shorter intervals, maybe 15 or 20 minutes, and kind of go through any outstanding issues that they maybe weren't able to adjust. The nice thing about this is that we get to target more people, we get the session more interactive, and then since the people know that we're coming around to meet with them one-on-one, they kind of have that challenge to actually apply what they've learned immediately following the session. So it's a nice alternative or a complement to some of that more static training, the stuff that can be really heavy on the reading. So if you've been looking for any way to help your office staff, even educate yourself a bit more, then this offer might be right up your alley. So we'll do a free training workshop with your staff when you schedule those one-on-one, those like mini workstation reviews for 10 staff. So that's a value of about $495. Great opportunity to take advantage of. So I will send out an email to everybody who has registered today just to remind you of that, and that way then you can reply to the email and let me know if you're interested. We cover a pretty wide geographic range within Ontario, so please get in touch with us if you're interested, and we can chat about how to make it work for you. That being said, let us move along to the questions here. So I have one question that is stating, so I'll read it out loud to you. So we have sit-stand stations. We find we're getting a lot of requests for sit-stand stations, but do you think that they're necessary, or are there other ways that we might be able to encourage our staff to sit less? Okay, great question. Definitely. As I mentioned, I don't always recommend that a sit-stand station is needed for everybody. I don't really think that everybody is going to stand. For some jobs, it may not be that applicable. Other times, I don't think that people are interested, and they might use it for a short period of time, and then it'll just wear off. Things to consider also is footwear. That's always my thing. If you're going to stand more and you're going to wear heels or dress shoes, you're going to want to consider your footwear choices, because standing more could create some additional issues. But part of our training, part of our education when our one-on-one assessments is always about talking about ways to find ways to move more, or find ways to sit less. And this could be, as simple as going through all the adjustment features on your chair so that you know how to make minor adjustments throughout the day, so that you know how to use the rocking feature in your chair, for example, when you're on long phone calls. Finding ways to stand up, whether it be to go get a drink, whether it be to go talk to your colleague instead of calling them on the phone. Instead of going, stockpiling your printing, that you're getting up as you print each sheet, not to the point of disruption in your workflow, but also just, making a point that means you got up twice in an hour as opposed to once in 2 hours. You can look for ways to move more. Maybe if you've got to have a little meeting with your colleague, maybe you guys take it on the road. And what I mean by that is maybe, you talk as you're walking through the building, or you kind of do a loop, and you have your little meeting while walking, as opposed to, sitting in the boardroom. Again, if it's a small group, I'm kind of thinking like a 2-person meeting. You might want to look for more ways like that. So in some ways, moving isn't as hard, or moving more isn't as hard as we might think it is. And so you don't always need to stand all day to kind of fight this sitting disease, as the media is calling it. Okay, so I will read out another question here. So we have a huge mix of office and production work where workers sit and use microscopes. Many will not stand or need stability from being seated. Do you have a preference of industrial seating? Great question. Yes, because I didn't touch on this at all today. So office and production workers. So let's see here. This is a good reason why I wouldn't blanket recommend that standing is better for everybody, because of the concentration sometimes that's needed. Sometimes, I even know myself, when I am sitting here really trying to work on a report and I'm really trying to concentrate and, use my brain power, it is just easier to sit. I just want to sit and kind of take a load off. It's not that I have to think when I'm standing, but it's just that when I'm really concentrating and working hard, it just seems to be a better position for me to be sitting. In some cases, I like to be standing more. Maybe if it's when I'm brainstorming, I'm creating ideas. I often stand when I deliver webinars. I'm not standing exactly right now, but I often will stand during webinars, or when I'm on the phone, I stand and I pace. Now, that being said, microscopes, obviously, we are not going to stand and walk around. And in some cases, if it is prolonged use at a microscope, I know people can often sit for, a couple hours at a time, potentially looking through the microscope. So in terms of industrial seating, principles that are going to apply to an office environment are very much the same. I like adjustability, and in particular, I want to make sure that the chair is going to fit them in a way that allows them to still sit in close to their microscope. So it may or may not have armrests, and it may be something we might have to consider is that it fits at a lab bench height. So I don't know exactly the workstation of the person who asked this question, but you might look at more of a stool height chair. Ergocentric, I know I mentioned them earlier for office chairs. They make their same chairs in a taller range, and same Global does as well. They make kind of their same office chair with a taller gas lift, so it can go up higher, and then you're kind of getting all of the same adjustability and support as an office chair, but for like a lab bench or more of an industrial. And you can also get different fabrics as well to make it a little bit more rugged or wipeable. Might be an issue that you need to address. If it's something where they're kind of getting up and down, or for a microscope, you may also want to consider more of a sit-stand stool. And I don't have a picture to really pop up for you right now, but something that they can kind of perch on. And again, one of my go-to ones is often, there's one from Ergocentric again, it's called the 3-in-1 sit-stand stool, and it's very much like a chair, but it just has a more of a minimal backrest. But the whole seat, you could sit on it fully, you could perch on it, and it does offer enough support. It has a little bit of a backrest that might help with that. So again, it's kind of looking for those sweet spots. Okay, so another question is, when would you typically recommend a contoured keyboard? Great question. So a wave keyboard, I often would recommend those if I was noticing some bent wrist postures when typing. And that often comes from, a standard keyboard is going to fit most people. But if you are doing an assessment for somebody, or, if it's for yourself, and you have broader shoulders, what you might find is that typing on a standard keyboard means that your arms they rotate inwards to get to the keys, and then your wrists kind of flare outwards, if you can picture that. And so in that case, a waved or a contoured keyboard would probably help to promote more straight wrist postures. So more often than not, I'm recommending a waved or a contoured keyboard for somebody with broader shoulders or larger hands. That would be kind of the general rule, but again, it's because I'm looking at correcting a posture. Another question, are corner makers a good idea for making a desk more flexible for workstation design? So particularly like the image shown right now on the left side of the screen. Perfect. Okay, so I'm just looking at my image on the left side of the screen right now. And this picture is, I think the guy is using more of a tablet as opposed to a corner maker. But if you can envision, a corner maker is something that, let's say you were going to work in the 90-degree corner of your workstation, then a corner maker would be a piece that bridges that gap. It creates a straight edge and fills that gap. And so if you are going to work, ideally, I want you to work on a straight edge, I guess is the answer here. And if you work in the corner of a workstation and it's a curve or an arc, that's okay. But when your desk comes to a hard 90-degree corner, and that's where you have your workstation set up, your computer there, and your keyboard is kind of at that corner, what ends up happening is you're likely to see your forearms kind of rubbing on the desk surface because the desk juts out. So it usually creates a contact stress point. And so if I was doing an assessment for somebody who was working at a 90-degree corner, I wouldn't let them stay there. I would maybe see if they could move to the straight edge of the desk. And then if that wasn't possible, and it really made more sense from a workflow perspective to have them in that corner, I then would recommend a corner maker to create that straight surface. And that way then their keyboard is sitting on the straight edge, right? It helps to eliminate or reduce anyways the contact stress on the forearms that we often see, and also allows them to bring their keyboard and their mouse a little bit closer, because sometimes you kind of accommodate your body in a weird way to keep your keyboard balanced as opposed to bridging the gap on that 90-degree corner. That's a hard one to kind of talk about without a diagram or explanation, so hopefully that made some sense. Okay, great. You guys have lots of questions today. Awesome. I'm going to try to get through them. So I know that it is 1:28, and I see we have about 2 minutes scheduled for the webinar today. So if you have to go, no problem. I should let you know that I am recording this, so I will get through the next couple of questions. And if I don't get to your question, I can see all the questions are here. I promise that I will respond to you. So just I know that some people may have to go to leave the webinar. So just so you know, you won't miss information. So the next question, my desk is high, so I've adjusted my chair height, but now the armrests are hitting my desk. Should I remove the armrests? And what happens if my employer allows for it, and what happens if they won't remove the armrest? So armrests on a chair are not absolutely critical. So again, you're trying to find that sweet spot in terms of adjusting your keyboard and your mouse in line with your elbow height. And so sometimes what might happen is that your armrests kind of start interfering. You've gotten to the right height, but now your armrests aren't really fitting. And so, if you don't if you're not an armrest lover, by all means, you can remove them. They are there to support your arms kind of in between thoughts, but really your armrest shouldn't be used to anchor your arms while you're typing or using the mouse. Again, we want free floating movement. We don't want to be restricted. And so if the armrests are problematic in getting you to the right height, then they're not necessary. That being said, a lot of people really like them, so it could be a matter of trying to figure out maybe a keyboard tray might help you get to that right height with less interference of your armrests, and maybe it's a matter of changing the armrest. Maybe they need to be a little bit lower, right? So you can buy, sometimes on most chairs anyways, you can just replace the armrest with a different model of armrest. Maybe a pivoting feature could be helpful, or a lower height. Okay, I've got one more question here. So our new customer service computer system requires staff to predominantly use their mouse rather than a balance of keyboard and mouse usage. So how do we prepare to deal with this to prevent potential wrist issues? Interesting. Okay, so they are going to be using the mouse a whole lot more than their keyboard. And so this is a great question where I would probably evaluate the size of the keyboard, right? A standard keyboard, again, is going to be relatively wide. And if they're going to be using the mouse way more than the keyboard, then we want to find a way to get their mouse a little bit closer to their body. And so it could be looking at the left-handed keyboards, or a keyboard without a number pad, and that way then their mouse can be, brought closer to them. That might be one way to kind of deal with it, is just kind of thinking about the size of the input devices and kind of the footprint that they take up in front of them. And then maybe even, what else would I consider here? I think that would be the big thing, really, is kind of looking at the footprint that they have in front of them, right? And so if they are still going to need to use the number pad a whole lot, it might be like an external number pad that's separate, but that kind of gives them the flexibility, again, to move their mouse in closer to their body. If you picture your standard keyboard, sure, you can bring your mouse in closer and you just shift your keyboard out of the way, but then it creates a lot more reaching or twisting to use your keyboard. So maybe looking at like a smaller footprint of keyboard. That would be the first option that I'd probably think of. And then beyond that, I would be curious a little bit more about your computer system in terms of whether or not, I don't even know if I would recommend a different mouse, actually. Part of me was thinking, maybe you wanted to look at maybe a touchpad or something like that, but I'm not sure that you would need to go that route. I'd probably start with looking at the footprint. Great. Okay, so I don't see any other questions. Thank you so much, everybody, for your questions. If I didn't fully answer your question as well, by all means, let me know. You can always send me an email or give me a call, and I'm happy to chat with you further. By all means. So info@proergonomics.ca, or me directly is ssnable, SSNABLE, at proergonomics.ca. Don't forget about that offer. Watch for the email that's coming out. We will have a recording of this webinar, so you can listen to it later or share it. And hopefully you can join us next month for our November webinar. Great. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.